Alone in his cell, Frederick Anderson, a proud commander of the Army military forces, could only groan in pain and frustration as the bindings on his body prevented him from moving. Meanwhile, the occasional electric shocks that coursed through his body forced him to stay awake for far longer than even his implants allowed him to without repercussions. Outside of his cell, 2 Royal Marines kept a silent but unflinching guard over him while cameras pointed from multiple angles and directions focused on even his breathing. Finally, he was disconnected and isolated, unable to access the Exalted Virtues network or receive any aid whatsoever. He was tired, and his body showcased a few bruises, but mentally he was growing weaker by the moment. Milcades, captain of the Royal Marines aboard the ship, had spent his time divided between interrogating him and the dreadful alien kept away in another cell. It was easy to deduce that the captain had achieved a breakthrough with the Drazen, as his efforts at interrogation and intrusion within his mind were far more intense and focused than in any day prior. Frederick didn't regret his betrayal. House Anderson had been loyal to the Astors, and for what? To be overlooked and set aside in favor of their favorite servants and their damn Winfield dogs. As one of the potential heirs of House Anderson, he was willing to do anything to ensure not only his place as the new head of the house, but to shower his house with riches, favors, power, and prestige. But he had been tricked, and now he was a prisoner and seen as a lowly traitor. The Council of Nobles be damned. Damn Ionati and Emerald for their inaction. Duke Cornelius should have been recognized as regent. He should be the rightful prince, not that weakling pretender. Frederick thought angrily as he glared at the Royal Marines before an electric shock made him groan loudly through his masked mouth. When the shock ended, he closed his eyes and breathed heavily through his nostrils. Only a few seconds later, he felt a sharp, intense pain at the base of his skull, as if something had just stabbed him. The pain lasted for a fraction of a second, and then he heard a voice inside his mind.
"Can you hear me, Frederick?"
A polite, measured, garbled voice called. Frederick was befuddled for a full second before anger swelled inside him. "Jade! How is this possible? I was cut off from access and inside this damn cell. No one should be able to contact me."
To answer your question, it wasn't easy. No matter what happens, don't make any sudden reactions. Keep doing whatever you are doing, or the watchdogs will know something's wrong with you, Frederick. I'm afraid our time is limited,
the voice indicated.
I'll cut right to the chase. What have you revealed so far?
Frederick felt indignation beat against his chest at being addressed so bluntly. "You may have the favor of the Castons and that of Hadrian Tigan, but you are still beneath me, Jade. You're as false as your name, as false as the pretender that has claimed the principality's throne," he spat back angrily.
"Your failure is your own, Frederick,"
Jade replied. "My own? It was you who told me that the damned parasite-ridden commoner had turned to our cause. He was meant to be a sacrificial lamb to eradicate the pretender in one fell swoop. My failure is your failure, failure born from incompetence. Thanks to you, we've been exposed and destroyed. We had the chance to end this conflict and gain the favor of his Lord Regent, and you failed, Jade," Frederick countered, wishing nothing more than to be able to strangle Jade with his own hands.
"Did I tell you to expose yourself in such an idiotic fashion? Did I not warn you that you had to remain hidden?"
Jade replied, their tone unchanged and garbled.
"Now answer my question. What have you revealed?"
"Nothing. I've not been broken. I've endured interrogation," Frederick replied, trying to convey his sneer through the link. "Your failure was grave, but at least you've been able to remain truly loyal to his Lord Regent, for now." "How much longer until you crack or until they start torturing you?" Jade asked. Frederick wanted to scoff at that notion. "Even the pretender isn't that stupid. If I am tortured or worse, killed, then House Anderson's position would be compromised. The insult and outrage of having a potential heir damaged beyond what's acceptable for a noble of my stature would be felt. I am untouchable." "He wouldn't dare," he replied.
"Don't be so sure. These are trying times for everyone, Frederick. The false prince may not be willing to incur the ire of House Anderson by breaking noble tradition and etiquette, but what about the damn wench? You know how ruthless she can be. She could convince the pretender to torture you, and then what? Everything you know will be for him to know,"
Jade explained and paused for a moment.
"Although, that may not be needed at all. The Pretender has already broken the rules that formed and maintained the Principality's social structure when he elevated a mere commoner to the rank of lieutenant. That mongrel showcased some measure of talent and above-average capabilities. He could have been a useful tool.
I can't comprehend how he was able to trick you, Jade, Frederick replied dryly. I will admit that I underestimated him. I thought I had convinced him to join our cause.
Frederick, you don't know this, but the damn Pretender elevated that treacherous bastard to nobility. He's a damned knight banneret of House Astor now,
said Jade, voice forever unchanging. If he could, the ex-commander would have spat in pure disbelief and indignation at the mere prospect of that becoming a reality. Surely you jest. A nobody commoner that used to haul trash less than a month ago? Him? A knight banneret?
Thanks to your stupidity, we lost the QEC in that attempt to throw the loyalist dogs to the Pretender off balance. It has crippled us, but not entirely. The few of us that remain will continue operations from the shadows for the time being. Frederick, I believe that this Wyatt Staples may not be a mere commoner at all.
Jade pondered. Have you not seen his behavior? His actions? Not to mention his lack of significant implants and the way he carries himself. It is obvious he is a commoner as lowly as commoners are. How could he be anything else? Asked Frederick with contempt dripping from his tone.
Because Frederick, when I interviewed him, I believe every damn word he said to me, Jade began. I never once detected trickery or deceit coming from him. Every word was honest and unveiled. How is it possible for a mere commoner to be able to lie in such a way? I'm an intelligence officer trained to detect subtle changes in people when they lie. Commoners are the easiest, and yet Wyatt Staples never lied. No, he lied. He lied to my face, and I believed him entirely. What sort of hellish training did he go through to achieve such mastery?
That's not possible. It shouldn't be possible, the bound man replied, flabbergasted.
The false prince revealed during his elevation and ennoblement that Wyatt Staples had been acting under his orders. Do you understand what that means?
Jade asked. Frederick gulped. It would mean that the Pretender relied on the aid of a commoner to make us surface. And it worked. But no royal would ever rely on a mere commoner in any capacity other than to have them die in their name, he reasoned.
Precisely. Without access to the records of the Third Fleet, there's no way to know if any information regarding him is real or not. Worst of all, we have precious little information as it stands. It is clear that he does not have a son or any offspring for that matter. In fact, we know nothing of him except for what was in the network, and his files have been put under lock. Curious, isn't it?
Jade let out a laugh.
Not to mention the wench has shown great interest in a mere commoner from the moment he saved her. Such a convenient location for a compost hauler to appear.
Frederick felt a rumble in his chest. Do you think that Wyatt Staples is not a commoner after all?
Nothing adds up for him to be a commoner, Frederick. Think about it. Redford took him under his wing and made efforts to mentor and protect him. The Astor wench and her blue-haired demon show favoritism over him. The false prince promoted him to lieutenant on the spot after rescuing his whore of a sister. No, I believe this has been a long-term plan of theirs,
Jade explained. That's absurd. Yet at the same time, it makes sense. I thought Wyatt Staples was just a pet Princess Clara picked up for rescuing her life. But now, I'm seeing the clear picture. Such talent as a pilot, able to find a new solution to ZTK 990, and his performance against the Drazen, the way Juliana defended his position, could it be possible that this Wyatt Staples has always been an undercover agent? Perhaps a Royal Marine trainee in disguise? Frederick asked with mounting dread.
I highly doubt that he's a Royal Marine trainee. He'd be heavily augmented otherwise. But an undercover agent? That I believe. No commoner would ever be able to showcase such natural talent. Until I can contact Admiral Cornelius or the Third Fleet, everything will be left to speculation. But the secrecy around the man itself speaks volumes of his position. I hate working with so little information, but everything points out that Wyatt Staples, if that is his real name, has been working for the Astors for a long time and has been dutifully rewarded. Likely his ennoblement and elevation to a knight banneret is another trick or the payment for services rendered.
Jade groaned.
Be that as it may, he's out of my reach. For now.
Why? The ex-commander asked, concerned.
The Aster trollop proved her cunning. She claimed the idiotically named Nornavio as her flagship. Personnel was carefully selected to serve in it, and none in our group nor any of my contacts were selected. The ship is also completely locked out from the network and only transmits directly to that worthless Damien, the Callan bastard, or the pretender prince. We are blind to the future movements of the princess. When we arrive at Matcha, I shall try to sway some of the personnel they picked from Woodshaft. Other than that, there's nothing I can do, and soon we will lose sight of one unworthy royal.
Jade explained. Frederick was certain that Jade was frustrated beyond measure, but thanks to the monotone garble, whatever emotions he or she was feeling were masked. Despite everything that happened, he still didn't know who Jade was, but intelligence officers were secretive most of the time. "You should have killed him then," he replied, setting his thoughts aside. "He fooled us all?"
Yes, I should have. I underestimated him and fell for his trickery. Now we are paying the price for such failure.
Jade agreed. "Then, Jade, what are we to do now? Will you attempt to rescue me?" Frederick asked.
Even if I wanted to, Frederick, I don't have the manpower to make any such attempt. Not to mention that the damned royal watchdogs would tear us to pieces before we even make it to your cell. I'm afraid I can't do much for you. Ah, it's nearly done,
Jade exclaimed. "Jade, you miserable rat! What's nearly done? Answer me, you disgraceful wretch. Why did you contact me if not to rescue me?" the bound man demanded angrily.
I've been tasked with a most important mission, and unlike you, I plan to be successful in my endeavors, Frederick. I take no pleasure in this, and I must confess I am somewhat envious of your position. Alas, this glory belongs to you and you alone. I needed time to get inside you, literally. Thank you for your cooperation, Commander,
replied Jade. "I am your superior. I won't be able to hold for more than 2 or 3 more days at this rate. You must rescue me whatever the cost," Frederick ordered, heart beating hard and fast against his chest as a wave of dread began to stir within him.
I'm afraid I cannot do that, Frederick. What you know must not reach the hands of the false prince. Victory demands sacrifices of us all. Take heed and solace, for you shall make the Lord Regent proud and bring great honor upon House Anderson,
Jade replied. "Sacrifice? Proud? Honor? What nonsense are you talking about? I'm Frederick Anderson, potential heir of House Anderson, son of Patrick Anderson. I demand that you free me from this confinement," he protested as he grew agitated. The Royal Marines watching him took notice of it and no doubt asked for orders. "Hurry, now!"
I am terribly sorry, Frederick. Rescue is beyond my capabilities, but I can give you honor beyond measure. You shall be forever remembered as a great hero of the Principality. In the name of Lord Regent Cornelius Draymore, I thank you for your valiant sacrifice and your outstanding valor. Now die in service to his Lord Regent, and may your failures be forgotten,"
Jade stated, and the link died. Frederick screamed in outrage. His eyes widened as far as they could go when he felt a hot, searing sensation spread from the back of his head like the tendrils of a creeper vine wrapping around his cranium. Then, all thoughts left his mind, and Frederick Anderson died, without glory to his name, his body going limp as blood trickled out of every available orifice. Nornavio, Princess Clara's quarters. No matter how hard he tried to, Wyatt couldn't stop his lips from curling up into a small smile as his fingers and hands moved the knitting needles he was holding with familiar ease. There was no hurry to his motions as the strands of yarn were put together to form a pattern. As his hands moved, his gaze traveled to the 2 women he was accompanying. The quarters of his princess had once belonged to Samuel Cayston and had been overhauled and modified to fit the standards of a royal princess. Compared to her old quarters back in the Exalted Virtue, her new room was bigger, more elegant, and beautifully decorated with paintings, a few plants, and other pieces of furniture. And yet, the welcoming ambiance remained the same just by her presence alone. To his right, Clara was relaxed, her hands moving faster than his own, and with great expertise while humming some odd melody he didn't know. To his left, Cynthia's stoic expression returned, but her movements were clunky and stiff. Her right eye twitched every time she made a mistake, which was often, and was forced to undo several knots to fix it and continue from there. Even though she's made my relationship with the floor a rather intimate one, seeing her struggle like that is both hilarious and a little sad. She's trying, but she's not that good at it. Clara wasn't exaggerating, Wyatt thought. as he stopped for a moment to reach for his teacup and take a sip from it, sighing in satisfaction at the sweet, sweet flavor of the beverage. He was half tempted to reach for another cookie, but he had eaten more than the two women, and he didn't want them to think he was as glutinous as a Clixol. Instead, he reached down to the small bag he had used to carry his knitting set and pulled out a jar half filled with apple-sized, dried-up green, orange, and lavender-colored insects. He pulled one out and bit into it with a satisfying crunch. The rich, sour but satisfying flavor of the lakoa filled his mouth, and he munched on it happily. "How can you eat that?" Cynthia asked all of a sudden, her eyes fixed on the lakoa while her expression remained neutral. Wyatt munched faster, and then swallowed. "They're just bugs. Every commoner in Volantis eats them," he explained. "They're a bit sour at first, but they're meaty and you get used to the flavor quickly, pretty filling too. You should try one," he offered sincerely. "Thank you, Wyatt, but no thank you, I don't like bugs," Cynthia replied. Clara giggled. The great Cynthia Winfield defeated by a simple lakoa, was it? Wyatt nodded while Cynthia gave her a deadpanned look. "Oh, you know I jest, Cynthia, but now that the window has opened, I can finally ask you, Wyatt, what do people in Volantis usually eat? I remember you mentioned an avian creature named Clixal?" "Well, yeah. We can eat everything that can be cultivated, hunted, grown, or traded, really," he replied with a shrug. "Mushrooms, Clixal meat, and eggs, several types of fruits and vegetables, like apples, carrots, tomatoes, and algae are the most common. Then I would say fish, produced from animals, and of course the lachoa," he said, raising his half-eaten bug. "We also eat other bugs like the rintal and the wolkama, but those aren't as good in my opinion. Oh, and smoked meats from various animals and bread," he explained before eating the rest of his lakoa and wiping his fingers on his handkerchief. "That sounds rather lackluster," Clara replied. "What about baked goods and spices?" "Almost everything that's imported are consumer goods and luxury items. For spices, we stick to what can be found on Volantis. I've heard stories about baked sweets, but until I was at the academy, I never saw one before. I never ate one, though. Exclusive to nobles, of course," he said without resentment, but his voice transmitted a longing that wasn't there before. "Had I known they were so delicious, I would have risked getting expelled for a sample." "There aren't sugary confections in your homeworld?" Cynthia asked, taken aback while Clara's expression was one of shock, as if someone had slapped her across the face. "The most powerful nobles have them," he replied without hesitation. "Don't misunderstand me. There are sweet things in Volantis, like the processed sap of certain trees and the byproducts certain insects make, like the lakoa. They burrow underground and form colonies, hunting down worms and other insects and eating mushrooms and roots. They produce a sweet green slime we call goonie, though comparing it to these baked goods is unfair," he finished with a chuckle while his hands continued to work. "Until I tasted them, I didn't know what sugar, chocolate, or grapes were," Clara declared. "Then again, I'm not sure if I could miss something I've never had." The princess hummed for a moment and set her tools on the table. "Wyatt, may I please have a lakoa?" "Clara," Cynthia muttered with barely concealed disgust. Wyatt raised an eyebrow in confusion before looking down at his jar, then at Clara earnest, expecting face. "They're crunchy and sour at first. Just keep chewing and you'll get used to the flavor, Clara." "Wyatt!" Cynthia exclaimed, now properly mortified as he offered the opened jar to her princess and watched as Clara pulled out a bug. Then, to her horror, she watched her best friend examine the bug with mild apprehension before opening her mouth. She then bit off the head of the lakoa, producing a loud crunch followed by audible munching. Wyatt grimaced when Clara's expression shifted to one of disgust, but she didn't spit out the lakoa. After a few seconds, her expression shifted from disgust to one of intrigue and then to one of mild satisfaction. The princess swallowed after chewing on it for half a minute, and he leaned forth, intrigued by her reactions. That wasn't at all what I was expecting," Clara confessed. "It tastes like dried meat mixed with raw almonds and the saltines of a pistachio. But the more I chewed on it, the better the flavor became. I wouldn't call it a delicacy, but it isn't terrible," she said before taking another bite. Cynthia visibly shuddered. "Your curiosity is a curse I must endure, Clara," she declared dryly while her friend gave her a very smug look. With another shudder, she set her knitting needles aside and extended a hand to Wyatt. Oh, this will be fun to see, Wyatt thought with interest as he handed her the jar. Cynthia picked a LaChoa and looked at it disgustingly for several seconds until she took in a deep breath and ate half of it in a single go. The pilot had to bite his tongue to prevent himself from laughing when Cynthia's eyes went wide and the color left her face for several seconds. Regardless of her feelings, she began to chew, and much to his surprise, her disgust began to diminish, and soon her expression was one of curiosity and then surprise. He spoke up only after she swallowed. "Is everything okay, Cynthia?" "It is not bad," Cynthia confessed, her disgust well and truly removed. "I've eaten bugs before, and they were all disgusting in every sense of the word, smell, appearance, and taste, but this LaChoa is surprisingly good after the first moments, not to mention I detect an outstanding amount of protein value and other vitamins and trace minerals within it." "Wyatt, are these LaChoa hard to come by?" "Not at all," he replied, surprised by her analysis. "The only thing more abundant than the Clixol are the LaChoa. In fact, almost everything eats LaChoa, and they multiply fast and grow quickly. There are entire farms dedicated to LaChoa production, both the LaChoa themselves and their goonie. Easy to produce, highly nutritious, and abundant in numbers. An ideal source of food," Clara concluded after swallowing the last of her LaChoa. "Huh, I never thought of the LaChoa that way. Now that mention it, Clara, it makes sense why they're so easy to come by," Wyatt rationalized and chuckled to himself. "Uriel gifted me an entire load of dried LaChoa. I won't be able to eat them all myself. As enlightening as this experience has been, I don't think I will sample another LaChoa," Clara said gently. "It didn't taste bad, but I will not trade it for my usual meals and confections." Wyatt nodded. "They are an acquired taste," he admitted, and turned to Cynthia, who, to his surprise, ate the rest of her LaChoa without any issue whatsoever. "I thought you didn't like bugs." "I can make an exception for these LaChoa. Now that I have tasted them, I only see them as a source of nourishment. Their appearance is no longer a concern to me, but I will not partake in them regularly either," she said, looking away. "Like I said, they are an acquired taste. Not everyone likes them even back home. My little brother, Wham, loves them," Wyatt explained as both women picked their knitting tools once more. "Speaking of your family, Wyatt, I've been meaning to ask you about your naming conventions. What are the names of your mother and father?" Clara asked gently. Wyatt's lips curled up instantly. "My mom's name is Winona and my dad's name is Wirt. Winona and Wirt Staples. Winona, Wirt, Wham, Weskel, Wyatt," Cynthia enunciated. "Not to mention the names of your childhood friends and several others you've mentioned so far." She paused for a moment and gave Wyatt an apologetic look. "Forgive me if mentioning them made you uncomfortable, Wyatt." "They're dead, Cynthia. You didn't insult them or anything." "There's nothing to forgive," Wyatt replied sincerely. "I made my peace with their deaths a long time ago," Cynthia nodded once, offering the pilot a momentary earnest smile. Then he turned to Clara. "Is something the matter, Clara?" The princess shook her head once. "I'm just curious as to why all your names start with a W." "Ah!" Wyatt exclaimed in understanding. "Is that all? I guess it must be strange to others. In Volantis, the vast majority of commoner names start with a W. Around 2/3 of the commoner population when I left for the academy, and I doubt that number changed much." "Oh, so it's due to a cultural reason?" Clara asked with a gentle smile. "I guess. I never put much thought into it. Funnily enough, in contrast, nobles never have names starting with a W, since that's just for commoners. And while it doesn't happen often, when a high-ranking commoner buys a knight title, they almost always change their name if it starts with a W. Silly traditions and all that, I believe," Wyatt explained with humor in his voice. Clara and Cynthia exchanged a second long glance before the blue-haired woman continued. "And now you're a knight banneret, Wyatt. Are you planning on changing your name?" "No," he stated flatly. "We're not in Volantis. I like my name. It's the name my parents gave me." The two women shared another quick glance and nodded. The trio resumed their knitting session in an enjoyable silence for several minutes until Cynthia let out a groan and smacked her needles on the table. "Clara, I request that—" "Denied," Clara interrupted her friend before she could finish her petition. "Today we shall relax. You can continue training tomorrow. If you continue to pummel Wyatt into the floor, you'll dent my ship, Cynthia. Let the man rest." Thank you, my princess. Thank you. My back, stomach, and bones thank you immensely, Wyatt thought, as his body shuddered, remembering the hellish training he was put under. Knowing that his training was going to get harder only made him appreciate his brief moments of respite all the more. Defeated by string, knitting needles, and yarn? Disgraceful. At least this isn't as disastrous as trying to do embroidery, Cynthia mourned before picking up her knitting needles again. Say, Wyatt, what are you making? A scarf, he replied, stopping for a moment and raised his arms to reveal a nearly meter-long khaki-colored scarf in the making. He chuckled, embarrassed. It's been a while since I last put my skills to use, so I want to start with something easy. Nothing too complicated. Simple yet functional. Good choice, Wyatt. Your mother taught you well, Clara praised as she presented a blue, violet, and pink square. I'm making a blanket, and I'm near the center point. I wonder what I'll put in it. A fighter? The Nornavio? Perhaps a cute cat? She said eagerly. What's a cat? Wyatt questioned, and for a moment focused his attention on the blonde princess. Seeing her smiling like that, the way her cheeks were lightly blushing, and being at peace filled him with a sensation of calmness that was hard for him to describe. He had felt it before. It was the reason he had been so open to them in the first place. His gaze shifted to Cynthia, who was again struggling with her knitting, and he saw her flaws easily. But despite her obvious frustration, Clara didn't aid her friend. May I help you? He asked, and was surprised that the words left his mouth before he could think about it. However, Cynthia shook her head dismissingly. Your offer is appreciated, Wyatt, but a lady must gain her courtly skills on her own. To receive more than a simple instruction from another lady disgraces oneself, Cynthia explained before being forced to undo another knot she made by mistake. Wyatt blinked, and his mind went blank for a moment. Why are nobles so obsessed with honor, glory, and all those useless things? Is it because of tradition or something? Does it work differently for noble ladies of higher stature? Or is it just because of pride? There's no shame in asking for help when you need it, he thought, and opened his mouth. But just when he was about to apologize, something Cynthia said clicked in his mind. Cynthia, I'm not a lady. Everyone stopped and the room turned silent. Cynthia stopped and slowly turned to him as if she'd been sucker punched. After several long moments, Cynthia tilted her head slightly. You're correct. You're not a lady. She blinked quickly and shook her head a second later. It matters not, Wyatt. The spirit of the tradition can't be so easily breached just because— Excellent, Clara proclaimed, suddenly interjecting. Since Wyatt is a man, he can help you improve your knitting skills, Cynthia. Wyatt, as your princess, I command you to give knitting lessons to my bodyguard, Cynthia Winfield, at once. Isn't this just oh so wonderful? You're training each other now. There was a moment of silence before Wyatt let out a hearty chuckle. I obey, Wyatt replied with a polite smile and looked over at Cynthia, asking her if it was all right. She met his gaze with her vibrant blue eyes and blinked once in approval, much to her shame and dismay. Oh, and you're forbidden from replying with I obey ever again, Clara added. I've never liked it, and I'm not about to have you say it whenever I issue a command now that you're a noble, Wyatt. Understand, Wyatt replied as cold sweat formed on his brow, but the moment passed quickly. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Cynthia at the same time Clara returned to her knitting. So, what can I help you with, Cynthia? I don't know, she began. I'm not adept at asking or receiving help. Can you offer me any advice whatsoever? Wyatt hummed and tapped his chin with the tip of a needle. Great. I don't know what to do. I've seen enough of her mistakes to know she's bad at it, but nothing that some practice can't help. She won't be great at it, but perhaps I can help her enjoy her time. But where to begin? What would Mom do in my place? Probably pinching her cheeks and telling her what to do isn't a good idea, or is it? Telling a high-ranking noble what to do feels wrong, but maybe I can show her. Reaching a decision, he grabbed his seat and fully turned to face a puzzled Cynthia, while Clara glanced at them curiously. Let's start with the basics. Follow the movements of my hands and fingers. I'll do it slowly, and when you feel confident to imitate me, do so, he offered nervously. If that's okay with you, Cynthia? As I am your teacher in the arena, you are my teacher here. I will follow your commands. Sir Wyatt, she replied with a barely perceptible cheeky smirk. "In that case, let's begin," he replied gently. The following 20 or so minutes passed in relative silence as Cynthia paid close attention to Wyatt's movements, until she felt secure enough to imitate him. She fumbled several times, but whenever a mistake happened, it was easily spotted and eluded faster than the previous one. To her credit, he was only forced to interject and point out her mistakes 3 times, and soon she showed improvement, causing her mounting frustration to ebb away. As he was picking up the pace, Cynthia spoke up. "Wyatt, if I may know, have you picked a name for your squadron yet? For that matter, have you picked your squad mates?" "To be entirely honest, I haven't decided on a name yet. Selecting my squad mates is another issue entirely. The information surveys—" "Dossiers," Clara corrected. "Right. The dossiers on the pilots are substantial. I haven't read them all, but I already picked the old members of Epsilon to be my squad mates," Wyatt answered. "Don't lose track of your index fingers, Cynthia. Go down, cross the stream, pull up, twist, and repeat from the other side," he instructed softly. "So the problem is the 5th member," Cynthia continued, nonchalantly obeying his command. "I'll be responsible for their lives out there. I can't just pick anyone at random," Wyatt replied. "The last thing I want is a repeat of what glory-seeking fool of a Bacchus Reed caused. At least with Nultar, Gregor, and Leopold, I have seen what they can do during a battle. Granted, it's just one battle, but that's more than what a mere dossier can tell me." He let out a mirthless chuckle. "It's frustrating, confusing, and annoying." "Welcome to the world of command, Wyatt. That's why I prefer obeying orders over giving them," said the blue-haired woman with an understanding tone. "My words may not be of much value, but if your performance against the Drazen was any indication, then command may suit you." "Well, at least one of us has confidence in me not screwing up," Wyatt thought before replying with a dry, "Perhaps. That reminds me. Wyatt, have you given any thought to your heraldic shield design?" Cynthia asked. "Oh, shit, I totally forgot all about that." Wyatt put on his best nonchalant expression before answering. "I haven't had much time to think about it, Cynthia. Commander Redford gave me this task yesterday, and I have yet to finish it. Regardless, I fail to see the value of a heraldic shield. What am I to do with it?" Before Cynthia could reply, Clara froze, and her 2 companions turned to see her and watched as her expression darkened. "My brother sent me a message. The traitor Frederick Anderson is dead," Clara said, her voice as cold as a glacier's. "Exalted virtue, command bridge." "How is this possible?" the prince asked as Juliana and Lukacs stood a few steps behind him. "We're investigating, my prince," Lukacs replied, "but I'm afraid that we will find nothing. No transmissions were detected, no stealth fields were uncovered, and the footage remains unaltered." "Could it be possible that Frederick had a martyr device implanted within himself?" the prince asked, his eyes closed. As much as he proclaimed that the army was the only true branch of the military that knew what honor is, he hardly made an example of it. I doubt that Frederick Anderson, arrogant and self-serving as he was, would willingly sacrifice himself for a greater cause. My Royal Marines reported that Frederick was agitated moments before his death. I'm certain he was murdered. His secrets silenced and knowledge lost, my prince, Juliana added, her eyes narrowed and burning with righteous fury. "Can nothing at all be recovered?" the prince asked. "His cerebral implants went haywire. His augmentations spiraled out of control in a way that destroyed them completely. His brain was liquefied inside his cranium, my liege," Lukacs explained. "There's nothing that can be retrieved. How this was done, I know not. It is the first time I've heard of such an execution method. It can't be easy to do, or whoever killed Frederick would have killed us before. There had to be certain conditions for this to be possible," Juliana reasoned. "What are your orders, my prince?" "Conceal this information. If news about Frederick's death reaches his house, then it may push them to side with Duke Draymore. Patrick Anderson will not be happy, and he will surely demand answers. Freeze his body. At the very least, we shall return his corpse to his family," the prince ordered. "Send Milcades to the Noir Navio. His services are no longer required here." "As you command, my prince," Lukacs replied. "Admiral, how long until we reach Macha?" the prince asked. "2 more jumps, your majesty," Damien replied from his seat. "The reports from Redford indicate what we suspected. Finnegan forces are focused on their borders and entry points. We have been largely undetected, and reports indicate that our arrival at the Felicity system will go without further delays. Our warp signatures have been picked up by patrol and civilian-grade ships, but they have avoided contacting us so far. Communication silence protocols are in effect and have proven effective. The aged admiral paused for a moment before continuing. I can only conclude that the Caiston traders and the Third Fleet renegades have no more of those black ships at their current disposal. More likely, they're preserving their strength for the battles to come. That or they are busy skirmishing against Finnegan forces, Juliana added. My prince, if I may, aren't we being too paranoid? We're in friendly territory. You should announce your presence so that Amelia knows you are close. I'd rather be labeled as paranoid over losing more ships and lives in a surprise assault, the prince replied. Lukacs, any further developments regarding the captured black ship? Nothing new to report, my prince. Our engineers and technical specialists are certain they can effectively reverse engineer most of the ship's systems and technologies. They won't be perfect recreations, but any gunship, frigate, and corvette-class ships will be able to be retrofitted and upgraded, once they are done performing their investigations and running tests in a safe environment, Lukacs summarized. Lady Cynthia should be proud. Thanks to her efforts, the Principality may gain new technologies and become stronger once the Draymore menace is dealt with. House Winfield will be honored further as it should be. Your candid praise is welcomed, Lukacs. Save it for when it truly matters. House Ishtal depends on you to correct it. Focus on that first, Juliana replied with a serious but supportive tone. In return, Lukacs nodded as the two commanders exchanged a solemn glance. The arrogant Caistons gifted us invaluable prizes, the prince agreed. They have cost my uncle dearly, a powerful destroyer-class ship that is equivalent to the exalted virtue itself in terms of firepower and surpasses it in almost every other regard. Most importantly, the secrets of these black ships will be a boon to us. He may have the advantage, but it will be a temporary one. He finally opened his violet eyes and turned to face his two present commanders with an intense fire reflected on them. He will be stopped, his coup will crumble, his conspirators punished, and he shall be reminded of the weight of the words he has betrayed. For loyalty is its own reward.